Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to the session of Business Succession Planning, a New Normal. As we all know, business succession planning is an important aspect in the life of business families. But somehow this is either negated or not planned properly by the families till the last minute. This is not a new story, but is continuing for quite some time now. Even our epics are evidence of such misadventures and their disastrous consequences. In Ramayana, Lord Ram may not have to go for 14 years to forest if successful business succession planning was properly given effect. Mahabharata, the entire war was the result of not recognizing true and correct successor. The story doesn't end here. It continues and carries on even today, but maybe in different forms and modes. In today's world, we have seen that disintegration of some prominent families into nuclear subsets. But not all divisions are bad. Some are the needs of the business and the people behind it. The question of personal aspiration versus family business. The question of new line of business versus existing line of business. Whether to focus on a core business area or a non-core business area are some of the key questions for which there is no straitjacket answer. In order to have a successful business succession, there are multiple aspects one has to really look into. A succession requires segregation of assets and creation of separate business verticals, which may lead to an important role to be played from a taxation perspective. So tax efficiency becomes an important criteria to be looked at. Keeping in view the vibrancy in the business and the kind of economic environment we are in, one really need to remain mindful of ring fencing its personal assets from the business liabilities. Also, we have seen the clash of personal aspirations of the family members vis-a-vis the family business. Advisors really plays a very crucial role in addressing such situations. Also, the traditional keepers of the wealth or the custodians should continue, or there be a better structure placed in terms of the corporate trustees is also a key aspect which families really look into in today's environment. In today's discussion, we are going to delve into some of these important aspects. The panel comprises of eminent name and personalities who play a crucial role in successful business succession planning. I won't take much more time anymore, and I will now like to proceed with our panel discussion. My first question is to you, Rajendra. Why is there a growing need for a business succession planning, and how a succession planning is different from a business reorganization from the context of Indian business families?
Yeah, thanks, Amit. And you have kind of, staged a very nice preamble, and you really ensured that why business succession planning is gaining importance. I think we are living in both in very exciting times and very tumultuous times as well. I think exciting because the era of globalization, the development of technology, as well as demographics favorable to India is giving scope to a kind of opportunity for family businesses that were not available prior to maybe a decade and a half back. So in that sense, the business for the families are not only growing, they're also getting more complex. And at the same time, we are also seeing it's not just about handing down to the next generation. We are also seeing an increased degree of specialization. So all these complexities and the fact that there is a level of transformation in the family business, also notwithstanding the kind of criticality that the family business commands for a country like India, where about almost 2/3 of the GDP would come in from family business organizations. And that's more or less true, largely across Europe and US as well, where we see 65 to 70% of the contribution coming from family businesses. So they hold the key to the growth, I would say the growth of the economy as well. I mean, in terms of holding the keys for the prosperity of the country. So in that sense, the importance can never be undermined. And at the same time, what we are seeing is the challenges are getting increasingly complex. It's not just the next generation. There is a degree of specialization as well. At the same time, I think there is a certain, reluctance to cope with, succession in Indian families, largely because of the unpleasantness of this. People would like to, see their families living at peace rather than looking at really conflict management. I think that's one of the key aspects of this is to postpone this decision. I think we have seen that. And at the same time, there's a PwC report that tells that only 15% of the family businesses, despite the importance of that succession planning, actually are prepared for succession. So many of the families, while reading the news, equipped with the best of information as well as best of advisors, still tend to ignore this aspect, and that's, I think, really the pity. So, as I mentioned, in Indian families, largely the transformation is really true, and it is happening. And at the same time, there is a criticality in terms of the complexity of the business. And at the same time, if we need to ensure continuity of the business and succession, planning globally has not been very successful. Only about 12% of the family businesses successfully pass through the third generation, and it's only 4% that go through for the fourth generation itself. So the record itself speaks of the criticality, why we need to have a transformation in this and a proper structure in place so that the continuity of that business happens and it passes on from one generation to the other. Because ultimately what we are looking at is, if we are setting up a business now, we are actually looking at a multi-generational wealth creation as well as multi-generation contribution to the economy. And that's, I think, is important. Thank you.
So you mentioned two very critical aspects. One is the success rate is not great. And the second important aspect, which you also mentioned, is an aspect relating to conflict management. So is people more conscious of doing a conflict management or a conflict avoidance? And because of that, the success rate is not great, is a very big issue before the families, I guess. Now, connected point, and I now like to go and ask the question to Rajesh Saluja. Hi, Rajesh. Rajesh, what I have seen in many of my past experiences in dealing with the family business succession planning is that a critical role is being played by the so-called family advisors or the wealth managers. Sometimes it happens is that a family advisor or the wealth manager is the first person with whom the family patriarch really confide and say that he is looking at doing a transition. So in your experience, at what stage do you see the need for successful succession planning simmering in the family? At what time you feel that people really start talking about it? And what is the kind of a mindset you encounter when you raise these kind of issues with the families per se? Over to you.
Thanks for having me on this webinar. Firstly, I think some of the points Rajendra covered, so I won't repeat, but I think this is one area where wealth managers and family offices such as us work with business families, not only around the area of succession planning, both in terms of transfer of wealth and assets to the next generation, and also more complex business succession planning. So my focus will really be around the business succession planning. It's a process I've seen it's often underrated, yet a crucially important one. And that has to be followed by most family business leaders to ensure that there's continuity for multiple generations. And as Rajendra mentioned, there are enough and more stats that 1/3 of family businesses survive into the second generation, and only about 13% actually make it to the third generation. So in my opinion, I think perpetuating a family business is the ultimate management challenge for most of these families. Simply put, it entails a process of identifying and training potential candidates, really, to fill up key leadership roles in the company. So for many family-run companies, this means choosing an heir from the younger generation to take over the business. It could also sometimes mean handing over business to professionals while family members remain shareholders, or in some cases, deciding who within the family will be part of management and who will be shareholders. So, good, well thought out succession plan, at least it ensures that there is a hassle-free transition of power and management in case of unforeseen circumstances such as illness or death. And it also, frankly, gives a lot of confidence to employees and investors that the company will function smoothly even after the chairman or the chief executive leaves office. So it's important to start early. And I think more important is not thinking of it as an event that happens on a designated day, but thinking of it as a process that occurs over a long period of time, sometimes even 15 to 20 years. So, and I think one of the biggest challenges, which also Rajendra mentioned, with most family-owned businesses they face is an additional burden of managing personal relationships when a business is within the family. So the business of a family and the business of businesses are deeply entangled. And most promoters and company CEOs often find themselves torn between business concerns and family concerns. And especially in large multi-generation families, succession can often become a very, very sensitive subject, and it can lead to family discord, long-term court litigations, and succession battles. Unfortunately, most Indian promoters tend to start succession planning when children are reaching the age of 20s, or when they feel they want to get involved in the business, or whenever they get some clarity that maybe it's time to hand over to a professional. They don't necessarily start well in advance because of some of the reasons that I mentioned. But I'm seeing a change in trend. Recently, I've seen many promoters start to lay the groundwork for succession, right from starting discussing business at home, also presenting the business not as an option, but not, as an option actually, but not as an obligation. Many of the parents are having those kind of conversations with children just to find out whether, they want to come into business or there is some other action plan that they want to take. They don't want to put pressure. They want to present it as an opportunity, but not as an obligation.
Sure.
So, right from identifying inheritors to seeing, who will be managers and who will be owners, all of that comes into, big play when we look at succession planning.
Right. But one aspect which you also kind of touched upon is the intertwining of a family succession and a business succession. And especially in the context of the Indian business families, if you have to advise a client that how he has to look at two subsets separately while they are intertwined or interconnected, how would you differentiate for an Indian business family what is a family succession and what is a business succession?
No, I think there is definitely a linkage. Both are linked in many ways. Sometimes, and I'm assuming you're discussing more business reorganization rather than business succession, because a key part of family succession is, about who's going to take over the business. But if you're talking about business reorganization, that can be done independently of succession planning. However, like business reorganization could be a key part of succession planning in the sense that, you may want to restructure the company in such a way that each individual family member gets a specific business to handle, or you may decide one sort of son handling one function or vertical of the business and someone handling a different vertical. So you even create two divisions within the company, more from a succession planning point of view. But business reorganization, which is absolutely a separate topic, can be done for other reasons, overhaul of business strategy, operations, cost synergies, tax efficiencies, M&A, etc., etc. So I think business reorganization is a key part of succession planning and probably not the other way all the time.
I agree with you, but I have seen more often than not when you are looking at a business succession in an Indian family which is engaged in a business activity, in order to do and pardon me from saying that, to do a please all situation by the family patriarch, he ends up creating the business verticals, while many a times those business verticals would not be required. But he has to give one important role to each of the family members, and that's why those business verticals, comes into the picture. So I just want to touch base one more question with you, Rajesh, is that as part of the business reorganization, what are the key driving factors to decide whether business should be continued or discontinued? So I'm talking about, say, a conglomerate, a business which is owned by a large business family which has diversified business activities, could be engaged in cement, infrastructure, electricity, oil, and all those things. So when they are looking at succession, and assume for a minute it's closely held, and there are few people who are very keen to continue with one segment of the business, few people would like to discontinue certain part of the business. What are the key aspects which you would really look into, or you think are the driving factors that one must keep in mind to say, okay, I want to continue with this business, I may discontinue the other business?
So there are two different things that you mentioned. I'll focus on why business restructuring sometimes is important and how do you take a decision on whether the company is worth investing in or selling off, etc. The other aspect is more a family decision where, irrespective of whether it's good or bad for the business, you're trying to please all the family members by getting them involved in different verticals. Ideally, in the latter, you should actually take professional help and ensure that the right set of people are being put in the right job. Otherwise, it can spoil the business or have a very demotivating effect on the entire set of employees. But coming back to reorganization of business structuring, this is clearly a process where a company does an overhaul of its entire strategy, setup, operations, all of it. And typically, businesses go through reorganization when they have financial troubles or there are new owners or there is a structural change. It could involve changing marketing strategies, staff, products, services, various things. Sometimes it could be even around tax structure or just basically bringing efficiencies or cost productivity. However, one of the biggest success factors on business reorganization have been where companies have done it more for creating a design for the future, design for where you are headed, and not for the problems of the past. So you, of course, need to fix the problems, but if you fix the problem by the time you are done with your reorganization, you're already need to be doing another round of reorganization. So hence, in my mind, one of the key factors for business reorganization should be creating a model designed around what's the future going to be for your business and how do you wish to be positioned. Of course, there are other areas that you look at. Is the business, the size of the opportunity in the business great? Is the market size good? The growth rates good? Are you a small fish in a large pond? Is your product good, etc., etc.? Along with that, capital efficiency. Is the business, the return on capital good, worth it? Or is it just something that you're keeping because you're so traditionally used to doing it and you want to feel employed? Also, the ability of the business to throw positive cash flows. Is it a big cash? Those are all financial decisions, capital allocation decisions that help in taking a call on whether the business is justified, not justified during a restructuring. But when you look at succession planning or business succession planning, there are two different aspects. I wouldn't say that, that has to be done irrespective of your succession plan. Succession plan is more about choosing the right person to lead it, deciding who's going to be manager, who's going to be owner, and what is in the best interest of the company. And at some case, it could be that maybe the children are not interested and you bring in professionals or even sell the company for its own benefit.
Right. Again, a very interesting point which you have mentioned, and I'll touch base on that in the later part of our discussion. I'll just move on to the next question. And Gautami, since you are with an organization and you spearheads the trusteeship activity, I have a question to you. From the perspective of the corporate trustee, are you seeing a change in a mindset amongst the people? Are they more receptive now towards the corporate trustees with regard to getting the succession work managed, where the wealth is also being managed through a corporate trustee, or they still have a kind of a perspective that no, it is better to have one of the trusted family lieutenants to manage the work of a trusteeship? So the aspect of the neutrality also comes into the picture. What is your view on it?
Thank you first, SNG and Legal Era, for inviting me on this panel, and really happy to be a part of this esteemed speaker panel. So Amit, to answer your question, I just thought, because we've been discussing on family business succession and the nuances of simple succession planning and family business succession, if for the benefit of audience, we spend 2 minutes on where does the corporate trustee come in, what is this whole corporate trustee about, just give me that much time. Yeah, so I was, the whole succession planning as a simple word, well, as lawyers understand it, is writing down a will. Okay, over the last few decades, and when I say lawyers understand, that's traditionally the approach. It's not about lawyers only doing that, they do trust as well. But traditional approach has been writing down a will. Over the past 15 years, if I were to use, because we've been doing this for 15 years now in Kotak, or maybe 20 years, people have looked at innovative ways of doing succession planning, like creating private family trust. Okay, the whole point comes up, why a private family trust, and there are different objectives which people look at, like, you know, you want to avoid the challenges which come up in a will, you want to take care of incapacity planning, you want to ring fence your assets from business liabilities, you have been hearing about reintroduction of estate duty. So if that were to come in, you want to protect your assets from the possible tax which can which can be laid over your assets post the demise of the owner of the wealth. So keeping all these in mind, people have looked at creating private family trust. And in a private family trust, if I were to just explain the structure, there is a settlor who's the author of the trust. There are trustees, which are family members typically, or could be corporate trustees like ourselves. And there are beneficiaries. So there's a settlor, the author of the trust. There are trustees, which are the custodians of the fiduciary or the legal owners of the assets. And there are beneficiaries, who are the people for whom the trust gets created. Now, whatever is the objective of the family, be it pure succession planning to ensure that there is an amicable disposition of my wealth and there are no disputes, or incapacity planning, or taking care of minor children as a one bucket, or ring fencing your assets from any liabilities, matrimonial issues, or estate duty, you will decide, depending upon these objectives, what is an appropriate structure to create. Now, once you go forward, when you're deciding upon the structure to create, it is important to understand who will be the trustee of this trust. Okay. You're absolutely right in asking me this question, that are people, accepting the fundamental corporate trustee phenomena? The answer is yes and no, because I want to give the audience the entire perspective. I said yes, and I will answer that yes in the second part. But the first is, what is a trustee? Trustee is your confidant. So Amit, if I trust you, okay, I will appoint you as my trustee, or I will appoint Rajesh, Saluja as a trustee, because I know you all, and I think that if I am not there, you all will take care of my family members as if I would do it. Okay. But what happens, God forbid, if the trustees that I have appointed do not survive post my lifetime, or they demise during my lifetime? Okay. So it is a very important aspect of succession planning of the trustee. So we are doing succession planning of our estate, but I'm also adding to it succession planning of your trustee. Okay. As soon as you go that route, it becomes important to understand, will I appoint a younger trustee? Will I appoint a trustee of my own age? What, will the trustees survive longer than me? Will the trustees become bankrupt? Sorry, I'm using the words because people need to understand it. Will the trustee become bankrupt? And if the trustee becomes bankrupt, are my assets exposed? Question mark. I'm not giving an answer. Okay. So keeping all this in mind, and typically, Amit, the succession planning trust that we land up creating, 70 to 80% of the time, these are multi-generational trust. That means they will survive for next 3 generations at least, keeping in mind the law of perpetuity which exists in India. That means I need the trustee, or whoever is my successor trustee, to survive much longer. And there has to be a continuity in the management of trust assets. Thus comes the question, can I look at a corporate entity, whichever, I can create my own corporate entity and I can create a board of directors for my own corporate entity, or appoint a professional corporate trustee like, say, Kotak Trustee Company, or many other independent trustee companies which we have in Indian context today. So to ensure that you build up a perpetuity, to ensure that you develop an independence in the trustee decision making, to ensure that there is continuity for the next 2 to 3 generations, you look at a corporate entity to act as a trustee, because that corporate entity will not get incapacitated, will not die, and will continue. Okay, so that is why people look at corporate trustee. But important to look at it, that are we comfortable trusting a corporate entity? That is where the question comes in, that today it's Gautami who's fronting it. Today there's Amit who's fronting Kotak. Today there's Mr. Gupta who's talking to somebody in context of a trustee company. But will these people continue, and are the families that we are talking to deposing trust in individuals or institutions? Okay. So somewhere the comfort level has to be established. The institution has to be working with the family over a long period of time, and then the comfort comes in. And thus corporate trustees are getting appointed, keeping in mind all these things. But it's never, or typically it is never, a sole corporate trustee. There is a board of trustees. The board of trustees could have private family members acting as trustees and corporate trustees. And most importantly, the decision making is in the hands of the family trustee and not in the hands of the corporate trustee. This is what we have seen in Indian context happening more and more. So if you, sorry.
No, please continue.
So if the family is able to achieve the best of both worlds by having a family member acting as a trustee and doing some succession planning in the context of family trustees, but at the same time getting a continuity and perpetuity by having a corporate entity acting as a trustee, then that is what is a preferred route with many families.
True, but there is one aspect which is very important so far as the succession is concerned, and that aspect is the neutrality of the trustee. Whether you call it, while two aspects are different, succession planning for a family or a business succession, but when you look at a business owned by a family in a closely held environment, it both to a great extent goes hand in hand. Now, there are instances in the past, and I don't want to name anyone specific, but a lady passed away some years back who had named one of his trusted lieutenants as the trustee of her wealth. And then there were allegations by the other family members who were also kind of very senior players in their own realm and fields, that the individual trustee has not acted properly and judicially. So the question of transparency also becomes a very, very important aspect. So especially when you create the trust as part of the succession planning, what is better? Why it is not better to have a corporate trustee rather than having a person whom you have known for so long? So that's my thought process, and I want to ask your views on it.
So it's a very important question, Amit, and this is the dilemma which plays in the minds of many business owners. Okay, can I trust, and I'm taking our entity's name, can I trust Kotak to take a decision on certain of issues which come up in the context of my family business? Most of the times the answer would be no. I don't want to rely only on a Kotak. How will they? And I'm not saying it's wrong to have that answer, that thinking, because how is a corporate entity going to sit in the shoes of the promoter and make decisions for his company? And thus it becomes important that you create a board of trustees. On the board of trustees, you have an impartial or an independent trustee company as well. So there is no biases which get established by the family trustee. And you try and achieve the best of both worlds by having some decision making given in the hands of the family trustees, or you write down the decision making by unanimous. At least at that point of time, the corporate trustee has understood what are the desires of the settler, what are the expectations of the family members and for the family trustees, and accordingly they can act. Again, very important to understand, Amit, is independent trustee is a very important concept in offshore jurisdictions. Independent trustee becomes important because there are adverse tax consequences if the beneficiary is acting as a trustee. Okay, today in Indian context, you don't have such situations or such laws. If there ought to be a law which says that the beneficiary cannot act as a trustee, or if it acts as a trustee, it has a tax implication, you will see a lot of families going through the route of corporate and independent trustees. I would not say corporate, I would say independent trustees. That is who is, and if you look at the definition of independent trustees in the context of US law, it's a very restrictive definition. Somebody who is not my relative, not my subordinate, not my employee, who I can control directly or indirectly. Okay, so I think this is an evolving principle or the topic. Today, people are looking at corporate trustees, but not solely. They are looking at a combination of family trustees and corporate trustees. The faith or the trust completely to rely on a corporate is not yet there. Of course, and if you have an independent trustee, which is not a corporate entity, there may be differences there. But to mix or to have a combination of family and independent trustee is always a better route to approach, because we don't know how laws will evolve in India. So if assuming the family trustee has to resign because the laws do not allow him to act as a trustee, in that situation, you will want a independent trustee to continue with your trust structure.
So in the context of business succession planning, while there could be a corporate trustee would still need help from the lot of advisors, because if you are separating the family from the business, for a minute, like what Rajesh said, that as part of the business reorganization, there could be certain people who may not be very keen to continue with the existing line of the business. There will be certain people who are still keen to continue with the existing line of the business. So when you have to segregate the family from the business as part of the business reorganization as well as succession planning, then there would be a need that the trusted lieutenants of the family who had been in that kind of a business line also to work in tandem with the corporate trustee. But do you see those kind of situations when you work as a corporate trustee for the families for whom you work?
Absolutely, absolutely. We have seen in the entire family governance concept that people create family boards, family councils, and these family councils, family boards have family members representing. Amit, it is extremely important to understand if there are, say, 2 sons and 1 daughter, you and the daughter is involved in the business and daughter is a beneficiary of your trust, you will give them equal rights of representation on the family board typically, and that this is all dependent upon the family desires, family wishes. And thus there is always a guidance which comes in to a corporate trustee. And as I said, typically in Indian families, you don't see a sole corporate trustee. But if there are concepts like, Amit, you'll be aware, and maybe you can dwell upon that. There's a concept of letter of wishes, okay, yeah, which is utilized in offshore jurisdictions very, it's like relied upon as if it's a guiding principles laid down by the patriarch. So concepts like letter of wishes are given to the corporate trustee. The corporate trustee is expected to kind of go through and follow the desires of the family patriarch. The issue comes, Amit, and that is where I would like to ask you a question. Is this whole piece about ring fencing of assets, ensuring that your assets are protected. And you've seen what has happened, and I think we had the earlier panel discussing about the IBC. Okay. If and business families do take loans, give guarantees, and there are pledges created on their assets. Okay, now you have a business succession planning done, a pure trust structure created, and the family patriarch promoter is acting as the trustee of this trust. And now there is a litigation on his business, not personally on him, but there is a personal guarantee. How would you advise the audience, or what would be your advice in that situation to clients as to how do you deal with this situation of family trustee and corporate trustee?
See, I think the first important aspect, and I think Rajesh touched upon it, is that when you do business succession planning, it should be done at a right time. We are usually very late in getting the succession planning done. It's not the advisor's fault, it is the thought process of the family when they involve the advisors, and then only the process really starts. So the question is, when you are doing it at the right time, you get an opportunity to structure things in a much better manner. When a business succession planning is happening, the family patriarch or the promoter will be very well experienced with his different lines of business. He knows what are the pitfalls relating to a business and what are the big points associated with the business. When he passes on the baton, it is not necessary that the new generation have the exact nature of experience or qualification to deal with those kind of scenarios. And hence, it becomes very important that if an adventure becomes a misadventure, it may create a problem for the business as well as for the family. So it is important that there need to be a ring fencing of assets from the liabilities. The most unfortunate part with most of the business families in India is, and I'm not talking about the large sophisticated business families, but I'm talking about the larger chunk of people who are still operating the business in a closely held environment. They collateralize and create encumbrances on their personal assets for the business needs. And hence, they are not able to differentiate that what is their personal asset vis-a-vis what is the business asset. And hence, this ring fencing becomes important because at times promoters are required to give their own personal guarantees with regard to the business needs and to avail the financial assistance from the business perspective. And when that is being done and the business sees a downturn, the problem is your assets, your personal assets also gets locked in. So this is an aspect where the Indian families have not been able to really segregate themselves from the aspect of this is my personal asset and that's my business asset, and I'm not going to mix the both of them. And if you ring fence the personal assets at a right time, then the business risks which the promoter might run to could very well be addressed if his personal assets are ring fenced properly. So that's where the challenge lies.
Sure.
I would like to now ask a question to Uday. Uday, in view of the ongoing pandemic situation, the way the COVID-19 has worked in last 1.5 years, have you seen the inclination of the families, and especially the business families, when they look for a family succession, that what is their thought process? Because there are some businesses which are not doing great. There are very few businesses who may be doing absolutely ravishing, looking at the opportunity which sometimes pandemic has offered. So are you seeing a surge in the families with regard to creating structures from the perspective of safety pots and ring fencing the assets to meet the accidental or emergency requirements?
Thank you, Amit, first in Legal Era and SNG for giving me this opportunity. On your question, Amit, I think my prior panelist did say that, Indian families have been generally late, right? Succession is like when I'm about to retire, allowed to give a reign to my next generation. That's when I start thinking about it. Pandemic has only preponed that thought process, not because, and I have said that in last year and a half to many families, not because people had nothing to do, at least first 6 months of the pandemic before it opened up, but it really created that uncertainty, which nobody knew about it before the pandemic hit. And as we went through it all over the world, India is, and we are no exception, that uncertainty which really kept in, has created this kind of thought process much more. And people are saying that, look, last 20, 30 years, a pretty decent amount of wealth has been, generated through good businesses, income, stock markets, various businesses, etc. And, if something happens to the patriarch, and in most of the time in a family business, I think, the head of the family is the key and he's known in the market. What happens if something goes wrong? That thought process generally should come in a normal time also. But in pandemic, that is really, the speeded up. Interestingly, at least in my experience, I'm sure others have faced it too. It's not only people who are really going to retire in 60s or plus. I've seen people in 30s and 40s. Some of the guys ahead of a private equity who is expecting a big carry maybe in a few years' time. And even younger guys who are saying, okay, I have generated this wealth. What about my future needs? What about education of my children, right? Number of kids are going to go overseas for that. Family needs. What happens to my parents? So that thought process has really gone into it in the minds of families. And we've seen a good amount of discussion. People are open to talk about it, right? And in the past, as somebody said, succession planning was only writing a will, right? It's my time to go. That's not the case. People have started thinking about it. The businesses have picked up, and how do I protect my wealth, ring fence? A number of those points have already been made. But the thought process has certainly gone well with that second tier, who are a very important part of the economy.
So, Uday, I have a connected question to you. Is that the kind of structures one see as part of succession planning, be it a family succession or a business succession, how crucial the role of taxation is? We all understand that everyone looks at the maximum tax efficiency with regard to carrying out a business succession or a business reorganization. What is your view on it, and what are the common structures that you come across from a tax perspective as the need of the business families?
So I think this is being spoken, I'm sure, n number of times in the past. There are only two things which are certain in the life, death, and then the other thing is taxes, right? Both go hand in hand. And certainly in the Indian context, the tax plays a very, very important role. Any restructuring that you do, any family arrangement, forget the succession planning. Number of families right now want to say everything is here in the head, right? Everything is equal about everyone. But you have to put it on the piece of paper. So even the family arrangement document per se has tax implications. And the last thing you want to do is your internal restructuring, unless there is some business which you are selling it and there's a liquidity event. For the internal restructuring, you want to pay the tax. There is an income tax, there is a stamp duty, potential estate duty. I think someone made that point also. So tax plays a very crucial role, and it can take away a substantial chunk unless being planned properly. So we have seen, like general, very easy. The first part is a will, right? You write a will, and then after your death, the assets will pass away. That's generally a tax-free structure. But we also seen that the private trust as a mechanism to protect, not only from the ring fencing perspective, but from tax perspective. Interestingly, 3 years back, a change was made in 2018 by the question that you have a deemed gift provision under section 56 to 10, right? That if you receive, and there is no gift tax now. So the people were misusing it, and the deemed gift was introduced about 10 years back to say that if you receive any asset without any consideration, then that is going to be your income. So the question which came up was, when an asset is put into the trust is receiving it free of charge, not paying for it, although it is for the benefit of the beneficiaries, right? Whomsoever could be the trustee, whomsoever could be the settlor. And a specific change was made in the Income Tax Act 3 years back to say that if a trust receives any property, which is that trust is created for the benefit of a relative, then that property will be exempt, which always was the view that tax advisors took before, but was still not free from doubt. And so a specific amendment helped that. And we have seen in the last 2-3 years, because of that, from an income tax perspective, that part has been taken care. Of course, from a transferor, there is a specific exemption, no capital gains, but a recipient had a problem. So that trust part has addressed that issue to an extent. Today, there is no estate duty. And in my view, the question is when, then if. If it will come, I think it will come. Question is when. There is estate duty in many parts of the world. US has 40% duty. UK has. And rightly so, you want to balance, the haves and have-nots. There's a social angle to that. So if estate duty was to be reintroduced, a private discretionary trust in the past, when estate duty was there till 1985, it used to get an exemption. So we believe that I would believe that even in that sense, the private discretionary trust is one structure that we have seen will help you from that perspective. And the third part is generally say, okay, why in future? I want to give some of the assets right now. Okay, let my family enjoy, not every full asset. So there is also a mechanism of gift between the relatives. And that gift is also, today tax, we have seen that increasing. Even under the old estate duty law, gift made for more than 2 years before the death was exempt. So I'm not saying people gifted to, have the 2-year angle, but that part is an important part to say, okay, the person enjoys that property, but is also exempt from future estate duty. I think in US it is a 2-year time, something similar. So I think these are some of the structure that we have seen from a succession, your personal assets or putting your business assets into that. Then from a reorganization, if you are asking the related questions on structures on LLP, company, those are the kind of structures which have, and then it is intertwined to the trust structure. That the trust will, hold maybe an LLP or a company in between, and then the business is being held. Even in the context of outbound investment, the FEMA comes into the picture, right, where we have seen this structure where the trust cannot invest directly into any asset outside India as per RBI guidelines. You put an entity in between, whether it is an LLP or a company. So those are some of the structures. This helps you from a tax efficiency perspective, but also from a liability and other factor that a prior panelist mentioned that.
Sure. I now want to move to a slightly touchy topic, which I'm sure many of us really come across when we look at business succession planning. So there is an existing business. It's a family business. Maybe it has different verticals. It has different segments. There could be a generation who is a person from a generation who is not very keen to continue with the existing line of business. So we come across an aspect of a conflict between a personal aspiration of an individual vis-a-vis a continuity of the family business. At that particular point of time, the individual many a times doesn't realize that what he is thanks to the business which is being run by the family till now. So I want to ask this question both to you, Uday, and also to Rajendra, that as professionals, when you come across the situation of a succession planning from a business family perspective, and there is a person who has a different aspiration, how often have you seen that the client and the family members really appreciate the need of business continuity vis-a-vis their own self goals, which they feel are very important?
Uday, you want to go first, or
you can go first, Rajendra?
I think, Amit, we need to distinguish, within the family, there could be several members having diverse talents. Yeah. Or maybe, the family itself is a limiting factor for the business. So we need to understand within the family what the members are contributing to. I mean, in terms of the business. One is, as I see it, there are typically 4 types. One is, one can be a steward in terms of having a fiduciary duty, stewardship, kind of a relationship to the business and wanting to grow the business and, contribute to the profitability, and then overall maybe contributing overall to the family's prosperity. Then there are family members who could be intrapreneurs. Like there could be some kind of a synergy or a complementarity to the existing business, and this person has a unique talent in a field which is fairly complementary to the existing business, wants to set up a new vertical, and then the family itself and allows or bestows that responsibility to this family member. So that's an intrapreneur responsibility. The other one is an entrepreneur responsibility, where this particular family member may not have nothing much to do with the family business as such, may not, maybe divergent value systems, or maybe the business itself is completely different where the family doesn't want to get involved at all. That's the entrepreneurship where, this particular person, completely carries on a different path altogether. Then the fourth one could be a transformation kind of a thing, where the existing business is too legacy oriented, maybe too not conducive to the changing times, and one wants to transform the entire business, but we are keeping the overall family, relationship in their existing, as well as, not really tinkering much with the value system or the culture that the family has invested with the business. I think these are some of the aspects that one needs to get in. So if somebody is an entrepreneur, then the family either chooses to invest into that, support that particular person during the early stages and allow the business to grow, or the value system is so different, the cultural values are so very in conflict that the family then looks at maybe diluting the stake, or creating a liquidity event for that family member. I think these all have to be taken with all the members in in consultation. Maybe some external advisors could be involved. The family constitution can be looked at. And maybe the family councils or the elders may come into play. I think that's the key thing that we need to take. So your question about when somebody is going into a new vertical, is it an entrepreneurship relationship or an intrapreneurship relationship? That needs to be looked at. And then of course, how much of it is complementary to the given business, and what about the value system, the cultural drivers, as well as the vision and values that the family itself has set up. I think these are some of the things.
So before Uday steps in, I have a connected point to ask you. Yeah. Assume for a minute that the person is absolutely going to do a very divergent kind of a business than the existing business. And in that particular scenario, there is a strong possibility that the other family members who are engaged in the existing line of a business doesn't appreciate it. It could be a high risk business. It could be a high capital intensive business. It could be any of the situations. Now, you have to somehow bring the personal aspiration and the family aspiration together. How do you handle those situations?
I think this is where typically the family, elders have to sit together. Then the lawyers are involved. Maybe the family governance and the constitutional structure has to be taken into account. How is, all these, what you are saying is basically, I would look at it as an outlier in terms of it's an extreme situation where the family doesn't want to support this business, right? And but the family member is kind of very decisive in terms of saying, no, I want to take that step. At the same time, I think, if we are also looking at the, I think all of the family members would have good intentions for the success of this family member. I'm sure that could be one of the reasons where one needs to see in terms of the risk factor of that business. What could be in terms of, there could be other areas where one can actually, without really investing into that business, but also support, maybe getting this person a right set of advisors at least, or at least, understanding from a risk profile point of view where how viable that business entity is, maybe looking at some kind of a due diligence support for the person, maybe even constituting or using the network in terms of looking at creating or setting up a team for that person if the person really requires that and the trust level is still fairly high within the family. So I think there are various ways in terms of creating that structure, even without tinkering with the family corpus, or even, if it is completely at variance with the capital allocation, the decision matrix that the family has. So that is one way of reorienting. The other one is actually, as I mentioned, if the family constitution permits some kind of a liquidity event to be staged, and this is one of the reasons why a liquidity event has to be triggered, and this could be to enable the person to separate so that there are no legal complications later on. Because what we have seen is, person not being interested in the business or the family structure, neither being interested in terms of getting any reward or the dividend or income from that business, it would be better off actually liquidating that person's holding and creating a liquidity event for that person, rather than getting the family immersed into maybe future litigations and future conflicts as well.
Sure. Uday, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Rajendra covered quite a bit of that, certainly in terms of mismatch of personal aspirations versus the family. I always maintain one thing before you're answering this, to say, do it when going is good. Okay, so if everything is still good, the person doesn't want to participate in the business, but there is still an overall harmony. At that point of time, or a patriarch has to take a call generally. So what I have seen in this situation is that you are born in the family, so you are entitled to a part of the, as a part of the legacy of the family. So financially, you may or may not be interested in the business. So generally create kind of a holding company. We have seen in last few years, create a kind of holding company or a master trust from pure financial perspective. And under master trust, there will be sub-trust for each family. So even in the event of tomorrow, people want to separate, that trust can, take away or put some of the parts of the business through a merger, demerger in those entities. That's why you already put in not only the thought process when I mentioned about the family arrangement document, but actually done an implementation to that extent. Of course, if there is a liquidity possible, which is very, very unlikely in today's term, then certainly you would like to give it back, sell part of the business or liquidate some of the assets and give it to that family member so that there is no problem. But if everything is done when people are at the good terms and everything, then putting this holding company structure or use of the master trust we have seen is a very effective mechanism, also very tax efficient, regulatory perspective, but take time to implement, because if you go through again part of the merger demerger, it may have its own time, but certainly conceptually this helps a lot, and trust is one structure under the Indian Trust Act of 1882. It's more than 160-year-old law which has been accepted legally pre and post even independence. So we've seen that getting used much more to put the even implementation in part, and as I mentioned, liquidity part is there then easier, but which is very, very in few cases that I have seen.
Right. Now, at the start of the conversation, both Rajendra and Rajesh mentioned about the very little numbers in terms of the success stories, while what they contribute to the GDP of India, the family-owned businesses, or globally, the way the family businesses contribute to the global GDP, it's a humongous contribution. I want to ask a question and that's a question to first to Rajesh, and then we'll go to Rajendra on this. Rajesh, in your view, what are the reasons that you would attribute to such failures? That why sometimes the business succession doesn't really work out so well? Why many a times we have seen that exercise have been started but stopped in the middle. Many a times we have seen that while it's been done, implemented, but the implementation has not been done effectively. So what are the reasons that you could attribute to such failures?
Two, three important ones. One is, of course, the courage to have sensitive conversations and create discord in the family upfront. You just don't know when to do it, what is the right time, and you feel that you don't want to give importance to one and make the others feel unimportant to any decision. So it's about the courage to take important decisions. I've seen many promoters have kept procrastinating it, and unfortunately one day they pass away, and then the children are busy fighting on what's going to happen. The second big one is to let go, because when a promoter builds a business on his own, there's so much he's invested in emotionally and mentally and physically and even financially, that he always believes that no one else can do the same job as he can. So he'll again not have a succession plan, wait and just let things pass by and hopefully one day take a decision. So the inability to let go, and for many people, because they've got a large portion of their wealth in the business.
Yes.
As a key part of succession planning or estate planning, you have to separate family wealth and business wealth. Many don't do that. Everything is within the business, and you are so financially dependent that you feel that if I let go and get someone else to run it, then what do I do with my life? So, that letting go is, so I would say these are 2-3 things: letting go, sensitive conversations, not knowing, when to just, pass it on to the next generation.
Sure. Rajendra?
Yeah, I think Rajesh has covered it well, but I know there are a couple of factors that I kind of experienced in my conversations with some of these clients. Many of them typically seem to be having a fairly, superhuman kind of figure in their family itself. Suppose they are the creators of the wealth. So they become not just the family patriarch. So they basically, every decision making and control mechanism is completely vested with them. The kind of, one is about confidence bias as well as control that the patriarch or the creator of this wealth exercises is phenomenal. So at times, what is not appreciated or maybe goes in a, kind of a blindsided is about the smaller aspirations of some of the family members that go underappreciated. Or maybe, there are people who have aspirations not at all related to the business itself, maybe, music or fine arts or some literature. So some of these aspects also are completely, maybe, not only blindsided, they might even be kind of looked down upon. So these are some of the aspects that are there. Then, of course, you have a typical, attribution bias that all the success comes to you, but all the failures are the advisors. So necessarily that also happens at times. Then there are, of course, relying too much on advisors as well happen, because you are completely concentrated only on maybe the technology side or the operational side of the business. Then you don't have much command over the other aspects like the financial side or the business side of it, and you rely too much on advisors. That also could create some kind of problems here. And of course, as I mentioned about, there is something like, you have experienced something in your life and you are conditioned to that either success or a failure, then it determines your future as well, and also how you bring up your children as well. So these are some of the things I think are more behavioral issues in terms of that could contribute in terms of the failures. So in addition to whatever Rajesh said. Thank you.
Sure. I am very mindful about the time, and I think it's already 15 minutes to 6. But I have one question, and I just want all panelists to take 30 seconds to give their quick view. And that is, what do you think need to change so far as the mindset is concerned amongst the families who are either opting to or moving towards the family succession? Let's start with Rajesh, and then Rajendra, then Gautami, and then let's go to them.
I already answered in the previous response. The mindset of letting go, the mindset of planning early, thinking it's important, the mindset of having tough conversations, sensitive conversations, with family members, so that there is clarity and it's not left for them to fight in the future. These I would say. And lastly, also, in many cases, not to commit to decisions very early, because it's right that the eldest has to take over the business and the others, need not be. So you have to put the right people, and therefore, even within family succession planning, being unbiased.
Right. Rajendra?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to the three-circle model, which very perfectly identifies the individual responsibilities. Ensure that these responsibilities and commonalities are appreciated and studied well. One is the family. Family can be separate from the business, or some members of the family could be part of that. Then business is separate. It can have a lot of external people around. Then, of course, the owners itself. Owners in this present context, it need not necessarily be the family. There could be an outside investor. There could be a PE taking a stake. There could be other investors coming in as well. So, in a sense, that I think appreciate that these three might have convergences as well as divergences and act accordingly.
Sure. Gautami?
Yeah, so I think Rajesh and Rajendra have kind of indicated most of the things, but just to put it in a nutshell, whether you are going to run a family business in perpetuity or whether you will create value and sell it, both require succession planning. So take proactive steps to look at the aspect of succession planning. When it's an M&A or a PE decision, you will be involved and you'll appoint the best of lawyers. When it comes to writing down a will or thinking of some succession planning or family governance, why is there a laid back attitude? Okay, I would want to say laid back. So are you saying that you don't want to take up the topic of discussion amongst your family members? So communicating between the family members, and as Rajesh said, asking the difficult questions is very important. And lastly, if you don't handle it in a timely manner, it is going to lead to business destruction. Why would you want to do that when you've taken so many efforts, or the patriarchs have taken efforts to kind of create a dynasty? So proactive steps, asking difficult questions and communication between the family members and having a plan in place are I think, the way to go forward for every family.
Sure. Uday?
Yeah, I think we've covered almost all things. I said one of the positive sides, if at all, of pandemic is that people have started thinking it much more seriously about it. They say, I want to put something on a piece of paper and, buy a peace of mind. And cost of not doing can be very, very expensive. Okay.
True.
People don't realize that unless you see actual examples. And the last thing, as I mentioned, is, the litigation, the tax cost, and running around for years. The Indian legal system itself, I mean, the decision can come in the next generation. So I think cost of not doing, in my view, is that people have realized. There's a lot of transparency now, and people are more vocal about it. People want to talk about it and want to implement it. So I would say, buying peace of mind, avoiding litigation, and I think all other points have been made very ably.
Sure.
Just to add, we tell most promoters to actually write a business plan, an estate plan, and a business succession plan. All three things. Write it down. A business plan for the business, a business succession plan, and then an estate plan, which is how will you transfer all assets to the next generation, and separating family wealth and business wealth. If you can actually put this down and not procrastinate it because of the challenges, I think most of it get resolved.
I totally agree with you. I think from my side, I would say one bit of it, and my 1 cent of comment on the whole process would be an open dialogue, which is very much lacking in this kind of activity. No one wants to have an open and heartful conversation on this particular aspect, which is very sensitive. Everyone wants to just push it and delay it, and that leads to sky falling down, and the mayhem sets loose. But thank you very much, panelists, for your time. Legal Era team, if there is any questions in the chat box, kindly let us know. Otherwise, we'll just thank the panelists and close the session.